Ever stop to think about what happens to a fallen leaf or an old tree out in the forest? I mean, it doesn't just vanish, it gets recycled. Today, we're diving deep into the planet's most fundamental recycling system, an invisible but unbelievably powerful process that literally fuels all life on Earth.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the ground crew, the organisms that do all the heavy lifting. Then we'll follow the incredible journey of three essential elements, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, as they move from the non-living world into us and back again. And finally, we'll tie it all together to see the big picture.
All right, let's get right to it and meet the planet's recycling crew. These are the organisms, from the microscopic to the ones we can see, that make this entire system tick. And it all kicks off with a process that is, without a doubt, the cornerstone of every single ecosystem on this planet: decomposition.
At its heart, decomposition is basically nature's ultimate cleanup service. It's all about breaking down dead organic stuff, scientists call it detritus, into simpler things that new life can actually use. Now, the real powerhouses here are microscopic bacteria and fungi, but they get a ton of help from bigger critters called detritivores, like earthworms and termites, who are kind of like the first responders on the scene.
This whole process is surprisingly logical. It happens in 5 clear steps. First up is fragmentation. Just picture an earthworm munching on a leaf, right? It's breaking it into tiny little pieces. Then comes leaching. Rainwater washes over those pieces, dissolving any soluble nutrients and pulling them down into the soil. After that, we get catabolism. This is where the microbes, the bacteria and fungi, release enzymes to chemically dismantle the material. This leads to humification, the creation of that dark, rich, earthy stuff called humus. And finally, mineralization, where that humus slowly releases usable inorganic nutrients right back into the soil, ready for a new plant.
And this humus stuff, it's not just a quick pit stop. It is incredibly stable. It's super resistant to breaking down any further, which means it acts like a long-term savings account for nutrients in the soil. We're talking about ensuring fertility for years, maybe even decades.
Of course, this process isn't the same speed everywhere, not even close. Decomposition goes into overdrive in warm, moist, oxygen-rich environments. Think about the floor of a tropical rainforest, but it slows way down in cold, dry, or low oxygen spots. And what's being decomposed matters too. Tough stuff like lignin, which is in wood, decays so much slower than simpler things like cellulose.
Okay, so this amazing process of decomposition, it's the launchpad for our first major elemental journey, the journey of carbon. As the literal backbone of all life, its trip through the ecosystem is incredibly fast and super dynamic.
The carbon cycle is basically driven by this constant push and pull. It's like a giant breath for the planet. On one side, you've got photosynthesis. That's plants inhaling carbon dioxide from the air to build themselves. On the other side, you've got respiration. That's plants, animals, and all those decomposers exhaling carbon dioxide right back out as they live. It's this delicate balance that's the main regulator of CO2 in our atmosphere.
So where is all this carbon hanging out? Well, it's stored in a few major piggy banks. The atmosphere, of course, all living things, and deep underground is fossil fuels. But the biggest active player by far is the ocean. It acts as this massive carbon sink, soaking up a tremendous amount of CO2. The stability of this whole global system is what helps regulate Earth's climate. So understanding these reservoirs is absolutely key. All right, next up, nitrogen. Look, if carbon is the framework of life, then nitrogen is what makes everything work. It's essential for building proteins and the very DNA that makes every living thing, well, what it is. Here's a crazy fact. The air we breathe is almost 80% nitrogen gas. But the catch is, in that form, plants can't use it at all. So the nitrogen cycle is this incredible microbial masterpiece that fixes that problem. First, special bacteria, and sometimes lightning, fix that atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia. Then, other bacteria turn that ammonia into nitrates, which is the form plants love to absorb. When things die, decomposers get to work and return the nitrogen to the soil as ammonia. And finally, yet another group of bacteria converts those nitrates back into atmospheric nitrogen, and the whole loop starts over.
Now, what's really interesting here is that last step, denitrification. While it completes the cycle, from the soil's point of view, it's actually a loss. It takes those useful nitrates out of the soil and sends them back to the atmosphere. So yeah, it can sometimes reduce a soil's fertility. It's a bit of a plot twist. And that brings us to our third element, phosphorus. Now, compared to carbon and nitrogen, phosphorus is in a whole different league. This cycle is a slow,
patient, and almost entirely land and water-based process. This is the #1 thing you have to remember about the phosphorus cycle. It has no real atmospheric phase. It doesn't float around in the air. That one simple fact is the reason it operates on a much, much slower timescale than the other cycles we've been looking at. So, how does it get around? Well, it all starts with the incredibly slow weathering of rocks, which releases phosphate into the soil and water. Plants soak it up, animals get it by eating those plants, and when they die, our decomposer friends return it to the soil. Over vast stretches of time, any phosphate that washes into the oceans can settle to the bottom and eventually form new rock, locking it away for millions of years.
And because its main source, rocks breaking down, is so agonizingly slow, phosphorus is often what we call a limiting nutrient. All that means is that its scarcity is the one thing holding back the growth of an entire ecosystem. That is exactly why it's a main ingredient in fertilizers. We're basically trying to give nature a shortcut to boost crop production.
Okay, so we've looked at them one by one. Now it's time to put them all side by side. This is where you can really see how they're different and, more importantly, how they're all connected. And here you can see it all laid out. Carbon and nitrogen, both gaseous cycles, with the atmosphere as their main bank. Phosphorus, totally different. It's sedimentary, stored mainly in rocks. And that directly affects their speed. Carbon is fast, nitrogen is in the middle, and phosphorus, well, it takes its sweet time. And that speed is what determines how often each one acts as a brake on an ecosystem's growth.
We have a fast cycle, a medium one, and a really slow one. They seem so different on the surface. So what's the one thing? The one single process that links all of them together?
And the answer, believe it or not, brings us right back to where we started. Decomposition. It is the master link. It's the engine that takes dead material and puts nitrogen and phosphorus back into the soil, while at the very same time releasing carbon back into the atmosphere. It connects everything.
So why does any of this matter? Well, because these cycles aren't just lines in a textbook. They're the fundamental processes that keep every ecosystem productive, from a farm field to the deep sea. They prop up every food chain on the planet, they regulate our global climate, and they guarantee the long-term health of our soils.
When you boil it all down, the real takeaway is this. Decomposition isn't just about cleaning up, or decay, or getting rid of what's old. It is an act of creation. It's the process that unlocks the building blocks for everything new.
Without this constant, quiet recycling, life as we know it would just stop. It really is the tireless, hidden engine that drives it all.